So today we are talking about my favorite knight and a knight who has been described as the greatest knight in history by his contemporaries and many, many historians. And that knight, of course, is, oh my goodness, hello, Your Highness. But that knight, of course, is Sir William Marshal. Now, if we're going to talk about Sir William Marshal, and I should preface this by saying that I don't intend for these videos to be super long. This is going to be a crash course in the history of famous knights from history. Super crash, super fast, super summarized, and super paraphrased because, well, for at least this first one, I'm the one telling it. In any case, our first knight is Sir William Marshal. And to understand the Marshal, one must first understand where he came from. So we're going to delve a little bit into his origin story, as it were. So Sir William Marshal was born around 1146 or 1147. The dates are somewhat disputed, although not like heavily, but mostly just because he was the second son of a minor noble and not really considered of any great worth at the time. Again, second son, minor noble. He was born to John Fitzgilbert, who was the Marshal for the king at the time. And the Marshal at that time, that title, really just denoted keeper of the king's horses. So it wasn't like a grand position. John Fitzgilbert was a noble in the English court, but he was not anyone of great import. John Fitzgilbert, however, married Sibyl, who was the sister of Patrick, the Earl of Salisbury. So there was a little bit there, but honestly, not a lot. So William was the second son of a minor noble, and basically from birth a nobody. He was half a step above your average peasant, to be quite frank. Like, just barely above a peasant, especially considering he was the second son. Now, during this time, there was a civil war. I should say around the about the time when William Marshal was 4 or 5 years old. There was a civil war wherein the Empress Matilda decided to fight against the current King Stephen. And I gotta warn you straight up, all of these names, like Matilda and Stephen, are the most unique names in this entire story. It's like no one in England could be called anything but Henry, John, William, or Richard. Like those are the four names. If you live in England, especially if you're nobility, and God forbid you become king, your name is either Henry, Richard, or John. Like, that's it. So there's going to be a lot of those in here. But where our story begins, it starts with John Fitzgilbert, William the Marshal's father, fighting for Empress Matilda against Stephen of, and I can't pronounce French words, but I think Blois, like Blois. Is that just Blois in French? That poor guy. But anyway, so William Marshall's dad is fighting for Matilda against Stephen. Stephen has William's dad's castle surrounded and under siege. He has a castle at Newbury, and castle is a stretch. This is like a fort. This is again minor noble. It's not like some great chunk of land. Stephen has him surrounded. And so John Fitzgilbert, William's dad, he says to Stephen, look, you've got me surrounded. I'm in a bad position right now. I'm going to give you my toddler son, William, as a hostage. Here's my son. You take him. He's your hostage. All I'm asking for is a little bit of time so that I can go back to Matilda and try to convince her to surrender to you, Stephen. Would you do me that solid, bro? And Stephen says, you know what? Yeah, I've got your son. You're surrounded. Sure. Go talk to Matilda. Convince her to surrender. I'll just keep your son and we'll chill here. Well, John, if you couldn't tell by my somewhat hesitancy earlier, William's dad is kind of a son of a bitch. Like, he just is. He is. He's something, this guy. So, Stephen has John's son, William, and John has just told Stephen, give me some time, keep my son as a hostage. I'm going to go talk to Matilda and try to convince her to surrender to you. But John doesn't do that. Instead, John goes to Matilda and says, I need reinforcements. Stephen's got my shit surrounded. We need reinforcements like stat, like right now. So instead of doing like he said he was going to do for Stephen, he has now gone back and gathered up as much of an army as he can from Matilda's troops and come back home and brought them into the castle, and now the siege continues. And so Stephen is naturally a little miffed. And he says to John, he says, John, I have your son. Like, here's your toddler. Here he is, 4, maybe 5 years old. I have him. If you don't surrender this castle, and if you don't do what you said you were going to do, I'm going to hang this toddler by the neck till he's dead. And John says, that's cool. Whatever. And Stephen says, no, you don't get it. I am going to load your son onto a trebuchet and throw him against your castle walls unless you do what I'm asking. This is Stephen talking to John, John, who is William's dad. William is a toddler. He's been given up by his father to the enemy as a hostage, and the enemy is now threatening to load William onto a trebuchet and hurl him against the walls of a castle if his dad does not give up his position. And William's dad, John Fitzgilbert, is quoted as saying to Stephen, mind you, threatening to hurl his son against a rock wall, he said to Stephen, I have both the hammer and the anvils to make more and better sons. Holy crap. That is William Marshall's dad. William Marshall's dad first gave him up as a hostage, and then, when it was threatened that William would be hurled against a stone wall via trebuchet, his dad basically said, whatever, I can make more. So, parenting, not so great. Now, luckily for us and for William Marshall, Stephen was not the horrible person that he was pretending to be. He could not bring himself to harm the child, and so he didn't. Now, this civil war between Matilda and Stephen ended up lasting about a year, at the end of which Stephen actually won, with the agreement that Matilda's son Henry, and I always pronounce this last name wrong, but you all know him. Henry Plantagenet. He would be the heir to Stephen's throne, and Stephen agreed. So the Plantagenet family was then secured, basically. William was eventually sent home to his obviously loving father. His mother liked him though. His mother was a good lady, and his mother was cousins with Sir William of Tankerville, who was a pretty renowned knight in and of his own right. And so when William Marshal turned about 12 or 13, his mother sent him off to live with his uncle William of Tankerville and to squire to him to learn how to be a knight. Because, in all honesty, William's dad, at this point, his career was completely failing. Bran the Anvil would have been, and I'll have to look back for her name real quick, I'm sorry. The Anvil would have been Sibyl, who was the sister of Patrick, Earl of Salisbury. So William's dad married up, um, but again he was kind of a shitbag. Uh, so John, William's dad, his career was failing, shit was looking bad, and William's mom, Sibyl, sent William to go squire to another William, William of Tankerville, who was a fairly renowned knight at the time and a man with lands and power. And so that's William's childhood thus far. As a toddler, he's given up by his dad to an enemy, and then when the enemy says, I'm going to kill your son unless you surrender, his dad says, ah, fuck it, I can make more. so, so not the best upbringing in the world. Not to mention the fact that William, again, is the second son of a minor noble. He's not going to inherit anything from his dad in reality here. There will be no lands, there will be no money. William is basically on his own. And when he's 12 years old, he gets sent to live with his mother's cousin as a squire. And he very, very quickly learns in service to William of Tankerville, and as he trains up as a squire, that while knighthood is about the glory, it's also about the profit. One of the stories. Ah, I'm getting ahead of myself. Getting ahead of myself. So he squires under William of Tankerville at the age of 12, and he's knighted by the time he's 20, maybe 21. Again, sources are kind of they disagree, but only because nobody at this point really cares about some second son of a minor noble. So, William Marshal is sent to squire to William of Tankerville, his mom's cousin. He's broke, he has no inheritance, but he learns as he's squire to William of Tankerville, who takes him to his first tournament, that capturing and ransoming knights is an excellent way to earn money. Hello, Your Grace. Thanks for joining us. We're still in the early stages of William Marshal's life, but hello. Ah, so William gets knighted. It's about 1167, 1168, probably early 67. He gets knighted. And after William de Tankerville William Marshal decides that he is going to now go and join his uncle Patrick because Tankerville introduced William to tournament, and through tournament, William started to learn that one could make a really good living kicking the crap out of knights and taking them for ransom in these tournaments. His uncle Patrick, Earl of Salisbury, is already a great known tournament knight, and so William leaves Sir Tankerville's service and goes and joins up with his uncle Patrick and says, "We're gonna run this tournament thing. We're gonna do this, and we're gonna do it well." So they do, and they have some success. It takes a minute. I'll be honest, it takes a minute for William to kind of learn how things work. There's a great story where William's in this battle, this large battle. It's a real battle. And he manages in this real battle to capture, accounts vary, but somewhere along the lines of 40 to 60 knights. But he didn't quite understand how all of that capturing and ransoming worked just yet. And so his accounting is given in court, and by most accounts, the young knight really proved himself well upon the battlefield. But one of the earls present, as is custom, is expecting some kind of honor, basically meaning some kind of cut of whatever this young knight managed to take in battle. But William just captured, he didn't ransom anybody. He wasn't taking money from them or anything. He was just beating them because that's what he knew how to do. He was just beating these knights, unhorsing them, capturing them. He didn't quite get the whole "now that I've bested you, you owe me money" aspect of the thing. And so he's at this court, and by all accounts, he's bested somewhere between 40 and 60 knights. And this earl is expecting some tribute, and William doesn't have any. And so there are other accounts, the ones that disagree with his accounting on the field, that say that he didn't do well. But they say he didn't do well because he couldn't provide this earl with the spoils of his conquest. The scribes wrote of it and saw him clearly defeat something along the lines of 40 or 60 knights, but he didn't take their money, and therefore he didn't have any money to give the earl after the battle. But it only took that one time for William to learn. So he's broke, he has no inheritance, and the only way for him to earn money is to kick ass on the tourney field, so that's what he decides to do. He joins up with his uncle Patrick, and they do that for a little while. But then, tragedy strikes, and in, I want to say, about 1168, Patrick and William are on an escort mission, and we all know how much those suck. But they're on an escort mission for a very important lady whose name is Eleanor of Aquitaine. And unfortunately, on this escort mission, there's a guy named Guy de Lucien. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a French name. But Guy decides to ambush them. Eleanor of Aquitaine is the target. But Patrick, William's uncle, ends up dying in the ambush, and William is injured. He is stabbed in the leg. But Eleanor of Aquitaine, she gets away. So their mission was a success. They successfully escorted Eleanor of Aquitaine to her wherever she was going, but unfortunately, Patrick and Patrick died, and William was injured and subsequently captured. Well, later on down the line, I think he was maybe a prisoner for a year or so, but Eleanor of Aquitaine, for one, she hears that he's the guy that like kept her from getting caught, but for two, she's also heard of William Marshal's exploits on the tourney field, and so she ransoms William back to England, and that is how William ends up getting introduced, I think, to Henry II, who was Eleanor's husband at the time, Henry Plantagenet. God, I want to pronounce that name. Someday I will learn the correct pronunciation. So, in any case, Henry, recognizing William for the badass that he is, invites William into his court. And William serves as advisor to Henry II, and then later on to Henry the Younger. As I said, these names, they're gonna be hard to track because everyone is Henry, William, John, or Richard, literally. But I'm gonna try to make it clear. So Henry Plantagenet, Henry the Second. He's like the first like famous guy of that line, really. His mom was Matilda. He was like the promised guy. When Stephen, the last guy that had a unique name, finally keeled over, it was Henry's turn to reign. Now Henry has three sons: Henry the Younger, Richard, and John. Henry the Second, he sees how awesome William is, and he invites him into the court and brings him on as an advisor. And oh my God, yes, there are too many Henrys. There are way too many Henrys. So here we go. We're going to keep going with it, though. Henry II elevates his son, Henry the Younger, to king, basically just in name, because Henry the Younger is 15. He names William Marshal, basically protectorate, to Henry the Younger. William Marshal is in with the court now. William Marshal is the tutor in chivalry to the young king, which I guess would be Henry III because he's Henry II's son. They called him the young king because he was 15. His dad's still alive, but his dad made him king anyway. It was more of a puppet thing because Henry II was still very much in control. Anyway, William Marshal gets named tutor in chivalry to the young king, and he takes that job very, very, very seriously. Henry the Younger actually ends up rebelling against his father, and the Marshal, William, freaking helps him because he was told this is your charge. Like, even though William technically worked for Henry II, Henry II said, "Here's my son. He is your charge. Teach him, guard him, make him better." So William took that very, very seriously. And when Henry the Younger rebelled against his father, William said, "Well, boss, you told me, so here I am." And he ends up fighting against William II with I'm sorry, he ends up fighting against Henry II with Henry the Younger. Again, all of these names, everyone in England is very unoriginal. That's what we're learning right now. England in the 12th century, very unoriginal when it came to naming their children. Basically, with the rebellion, it was Henry II's kids bitching about the fact that even though Henry II named Henry the Younger king, it didn't mean anything. Henry II still controlled the country, and all of his children were left with very minor, if anything, they didn't actually have any real power, and so they were pissed about that. So they went to war with their dad because that's what you did at this point in time. If your if your dad didn't give you what you wanted him to, you went to war against him. Miss Aquitaine, she switched sides with her children and her husband like a million times. She is an amazingly awesome character to study, but we're talking about the Marshal here, so I'm trying not to get sidetracked. But this is story time, so it might happen. Anyway, Henry the Younger and Henry II, they make good. It's a small rebellion. William fights with Henry the Younger against Henry II. Whatever. Small rebellion. They make up because Henry II finally gives his sons some more power and some more lands and whatnot. Cool, whatever. At this point, Henry the Younger says, you know what? The knight that you assigned to me and who is my mentor is an amazingly awesome tournament knight. He kicks all of the ass, and I want to do the same thing. And so Henry the Younger hits that tournament circuit and hits it hard. And William Marshal, of course, goes with him because Henry the Younger is his charge. That's funny, Brand, because Henry II is his real dad. William Marshal just probably should have been. Um, but so William Marshal goes with Henry the Younger on the tournament circuit, and they rack it up. There's an accounting that says within 10 months, William Marshal racks up 103 captures as far as knights go. He captures 103 knights in 10 months on the tourney circuit. I mean, with Henry the Younger, but to be honest, at this point, I think everybody knows William Marshal's doing all the work. So some time passes, and the Plantagenet family grows into more and more power. And Henry II has given all of his sons all this power. William is still mentor and basically in charge of Henry the Younger. And I'm checking my notes here just to make sure I don't get lost because it's very possible at this point. Hey, by the way, guys, cheers, and I love you all. I don't know what the drinking game is for this, but as Grace Cameron and Sir Cecil could probably make one up. Oh, here's a fun fact. William Marshal actually knighted Henry the Younger. So Henry the Younger was named king at 15 and basically squired to William Marshal, but he can't be a squire because he's king. But William Marshal, regardless, ended up knighting Henry the Younger somewhere around 1174, despite the fact that Henry the Younger was William Marshal's lord and king. William knighted him, which was, well, pretty much unheard of. Like, you just don't do that. There was a lot of falling in and out with the Plantagenets. That whole family seemed very, very fickle from my reading of history. And also, they're even as early as it was, like I said, 1170s. Um, the courts were such that you could actually be born into it. There was there was definitely some of that action going on. and some bullshit going on because of it. So there were a lot of people that were jealous of, or rather envious of, William Marshal because he had the ear of Henry II and Henry the Younger and Eleanor of Aquitaine. Like they all listened to him and they all wanted his advice on things. And so a lot of other nobles within the court started this rumor that William had an affair with Henry the Younger's wife. Historians debate whether this is true or not, and mostly agree that it's not true. Um, William was definitely, I would say, a little bit opportunistic in his positioning within the royal family, and he did, of course, make a lot of money on tournament by ransoming knights and whatnot. But there were a lot of people who felt like, who the hell is this guy? This nobody. Who is this absolute nobody to be so in with the royal family as to be damn near untouchable? Like, who is this guy, really? His dad was a horse lord. Like, fuck this guy. Who are you? And like we get you're a hot stick on the tourney circuit, but what makes you so special that you are now, oh my goodness. Hello, my friend from Thailand. Hi. I want to say you are doing an amazing job out there. I'm sorry, tangents are going to happen, but my friend from Thailand just hopped into the chat here. And if you haven't seen his SCA page, SCA Thailand, you need to. They are doing amazing work over there. Sir Cecil spent some time with them, training and teaching and whatnot, and a couple other people have gone as well. But these guys, they are showing the heart and soul of the SCA, and they are doing an amazing job. I love seeing all the photos of their medieval village. So hi, thank you for joining us. Anyway, back to where I was going. A bunch of the nobles didn't like William Marshal because who the hell is this guy? Second son of a minor noble, like the horse guy? Like, no. Why is he suddenly advising the royal family on everything? So the thought is a lot of them started this rumor that he slept with Henry the Younger's wife, which a lot of historians think is untrue, and it has more to do with the fact that William was gaining a lot of wealth through tournament and through smooth negotiations. So he falls out of favor actually, and he has to leave. But he eventually makes up with Henry the Younger, and comes back, because I think Henry the Younger knew it was bullshit. I think he did. I think Henry the Younger must have known it was bullshit, because why, after a year and a half or 2 years of exile, would he just say, you know what, William? I don't believe you slept with my wife. Come on back, buddy. There was, of course, another rebellion, except this time Henry the Younger sided with his father, Henry II, against Richard the Lionheart and John, and he was begging William Marshal to please come back and fight with him against Richard and John, and I think Eleanor at this point. That family fought wars against each other all the damn time. Can you imagine that? Like, imagine you have two brothers and you have a disagreement with your dad, so you gather your armies and fight a war against your dad. And maybe you get your mom on your side and she brings her armies too because she is of Aquitaine. She has all of Aquitaine. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I could be horribly wrong. Just horribly wrong. I'm going to tell one more story about William the Marshal before I wrap all of this up. But you can already see that William the Marshal is a key figure in this whole dynasty. He served Henry II, Henry the Younger, Richard the Lionheart, John, the bad guy from Robin Hood, and then John's son, Henry III. In fact, while William Marshal served Henry III, he was named Regent of the kingdom because John, that bad guy from Robin Hood, died, and Henry III was like 9 years old. And so William Marshal effectively ruled England for a time. I just want that to sink in a little bit. This second son of a minor noble ruled England for a time as regent because of how awesome he was. One of my favorite stories, Richard the Lionheart. Richard the Lionheart is in his prime. He's in his mid 20s, probably. Maybe a little bit younger, actually, like 21, 22. He is an absolute beast of a man and a killer on. Hello, Your Excellency. I'm sorry, I keep seeing people join like halfway through, but I want to say hello to Count Alaric for joining us and thank you. We're discussing William Marshall and we're getting into one of my more favorite stories involving Richard. And we're gonna end this real soon because I just saw we're at 45 minutes now. But let's get through this Richard story and then we'll try to wrap things up. But cheers to Your Excellency. Thank you, Count Alaric, for joining us. Um, so Richard, early 20s, absolute beast of a man on the battlefield. Like nobody can touch him. He is the shit. Anyway, he's basically bankrupting the country at this point. He is running about the world on campaigns that basically he's just going on because he loves fighting. Which, I mean, part of me is like, I can't blame you. I love fighting too, but he's taking his army all over Europe and into the Holy Land and back again and just everywhere. And he's just fighting everybody that will fight him because. And he's bankrupting the country because they just can't pay to keep the army like his army moving like that. You got to feed these guys, right? So he's running all around the world because he likes fighting. And I believe the way I heard this story and what I remember reading was that Eleanor of Aquitaine went to William Marshal and she said, "Listen, my son Richard is draining coffers left and right with his campaigns and crusades. He loves fighting, and he will fight regardless of any benefit to fighting. He just loves fighting, and he is ruining us. He is draining the bank. I need you. I need you to go talk to him. Talk some sense into him." Well, at this point, we're skipping ahead a lot of years. William Marshall is in his 50s, at least. He's already served Henry II. He's already served Henry the Younger. He has been watching Richard and John and just grow up and advising the Plantagenet family from the get and helping them. He's always been loyal to Henry the Younger. I skipped the part where Henry the Younger actually died, unfortunately, and made William swear a promise. We'll get back to that later. Uh, But Henry the Younger died, and that was pretty much when William fucked off and hit the tourney circuit real hard and then retired and said, "I'm doing nothing." But then Eleanor dragged him back in when Richard was causing all of his shit, and she said, "William, I need you to go talk some sense into my son because he's being a d-bag." And so William Marshall says, "All right, I can't refuse you Like, okay, I will go talk to him. So William, at 50 years old, rides down to meet with Richard and negotiate. And to say, Richard, you need to stop this craziness and come home. You are wasting way too much money. This is a foolish endeavor. I know you like fighting, but just do it in tourney. Stop stop taking the army everywhere. And Richard basically, from what I've read and what I've heard, Richard basically says, F you, old man, make me. To which I like to picture William Marshal sighing heavily and saying, okay. Because the fact is, he agrees. He says to Richard, okay, fine, lances at dawn. And Richard, being Richard, the hottest stick in the country, in the world at this point, he says, all right, old man, lances at dawn. Let's do this stuff. Long story short, William Marshal doesn't just beat Richard, he beats him soundly. He could have killed Richard, easily could have killed him, but instead of killing Richard, William Marshal kills Richard's horse. He kills Richard's horse. He leaves Richard unseated and in the dirt. And he says, basically, listen to your mom, go the fuck home. And then William Marshal picks up his shit and goes home, leaving Richard in the dirt with a dead horse. In front of his whole army, I might add. Because when Richard went out to meet William on that field, lances at dawn, Richard brought his entire army to watch the spectacle. And William killed Richard's horse and then left Richard in the dirt. And he's in his 50s at this point. Richard in his early 20s. It's probably one of my favorite stories about William Marshall, just because it kind of illustrates how much you don't want to fuck with him. But he's also just a very loyal dude. Like, all of the Plantagenets, because I gotta say, after this embarrassment, after this embarrassment where William totally embarrassed Richard in front of his entire army, Henry II finally does die. And so, oh hell yes, Fava. Hell yeah. So Richard, or sorry, Sir. Cheers, everybody. How about every time William loses track, take a drink? So William Marshall has, as a 50-year-old man, has embarrassed this 21-year-old in front of his entire army. And then less than 2 years later, Henry II dies, and Richard actually gets the throne because Henry the Younger is already dead. Henry the Younger died before Henry II did. Henry II finally dies, and the throne goes to Richard the Lionheart, and the Lionheart takes the throne. And Henry II had promised William Marshal, because of all the amazing stuff that William Marshal had been doing for his family, Henry II promised William Marshal a lady named Isabel. Oh, and this lady, she stood to inherit so very, very, very much. She was the prize. Um, but anyway, so Henry II promised William this lady, and 2 years after William embarrasses the shit out of Richard the Lionheart then turns around and honors his father's promise to William Marshal and gives William Marshal Isabel. And through Isabel, William Marshal gains. Oh my goodness. I gotta look at my notes again to see all the names of all the lands that he gets. One of them is Cartmel or Cartmel, Cartmel in Lancashire. Uh, and he also gains. Oh God, I'm losing my notes, but I think it's Caravel. William Marshall gets a lot of land out of this deal because Isabel, through her family, has a lot of land. And Richard, despite the fact that William put him in the dirt and embarrassed him in front of his entire army, Richard the Lionheart honors his father's wish to give William Isabel and does. And William advises Richard while he's king. And then he goes on to advise John while he's king. And then when John signs the Magna Carta, he supports John. And then when John reneges on the Magna Carta, he fights against John. And then, despite the fact he fought against John, like, John names William protector of John's son, Henry III, and regent of the kingdom until Henry III is old enough to rule. And after John, the bad king from the Robin Hood stories, dies, and William is regent in charge of Henry III, William reinstates and signs the Magna Carta as a primary baron on the Magna Carta after John dies, and Henry III is technically king, but William Marshal rules the damn country. William Marshal started as nothing, like damn near less than nothing. Second son of a minor noble who was effectively in charge of the king's horses. And he rose from this absolute obscurity through the strength of his arm. And that is a poor phrase because I gotta tell you, fighting wise, it's not about this, it's about this. But anyway, William Marshal. Yes, Roberto, yes. William Marshal is Liam Neeson in every action movie. William Marshal rose from nothing. From the point where his dad was willing to have him splattered against the walls of a castle like he meant absolutely nothing at all, to the point where William Marshal advised the almost entire Plantagenet line. The founding of it, at the very least. He advised five kings as their go-to guy. And that is why his biography is one of the only biographies to survive that is not about a royal person. He's the only non-royal from that time period who has a biography that survives to this day. And in that biography, it is written that William Marshal was the absolute greatest knight of his time. He finally died at the age of 73. And on his deathbed, he kept his promise to Henry the Younger, who had made a promise himself to the Knights Templar, and that was that he would go on crusade with them. William Marshal went on crusade with the Knights Templar, and nothing's written about it because he did it kind of in secret somewhere in the 1170s. He spent 2 years, probably while he was ostracized from Henry the Younger's court, actually. Um, but he spent 2 years on crusade in the Holy Land with the Templars and promised to them that he would then be interred in a Templar church when he died. And on his deathbed at age 73, he kept that promise. He called the bishops to him. He made sure Henry III was taken care of. He called his daughters to him. He made sure that he would be interred in a Templar church that, by the way, he actually founded in England because he's a badass. But he called his daughters to him around 73 or 74. His health was finally starting to fail. And he called his daughters to him and he said, I wish to sing with you. And William Marshal, with his daughters at his side, sang a battle hymn and went to heaven. The greatest knight that ever lived. Guys, this video has now gone on for exactly 1 hour. I want to thank each and every one of you that tuned in, even for a few minutes. I want to thank everyone, especially that stayed with me throughout this entire hour. I want to raise a glass to, again, my prince, my princess, my king, my queen, and the glorious Middle Kingdom. I hope you've enjoyed this little storytelling adventure with me. I hope to do more in the future. If you liked it, let me know. You're all amazing, and I thank you all, and I hope you had fun. Again, I don't know what to call this, so please drop a line and leave me some suggestions. I love you all. In the words of some other true scholars, be excellent to each other. We'll see you in the next one. I've been William Rain. Good night.